Thank you. Welcome. My name's Andrew Brust, and I have a marketing strategy and market intelligence role at Datamere. I also write about big data for ZDNet. I write a column or a blog called Big on Data. Before I was at Datamere, I was the research director for big data at the research side of GigaOM when that still existed. And before that, for most of my career, actually, I've been involved in consulting, doing application development and BI consulting, mostly for enterprise customers at boutique consulting firms, including my own. So what I have to talk about here is a little bit of a worldview that's a combination of all that background, okay? I'm at a vendor now. I'm still kind of covering the industry as a journalist. I was an analyst, and I've spent a lot of time really just helping get projects done. And all of that kind of combines into looking at where the big data ecosystem is now and realizing that while we've had an awful lot of innovation over, let's say, the last 5 years, and it's been wonderful, we now kind of have something that's evolved a little bit accidentally and a little bit organically. And quite frankly, it's a huge frigging mess. It is something that is very hostile to the enterprise buyer because we have so much complexity in the ecosystem now. And it's my assertion that because of that current state of affairs, we're limiting the opportunities and the size of the market, maybe without actually realizing it. So what I want to do in this session is, first of all, get beyond the accusation and try and give you a little substantiation for why I'm saying this. I want to put some urgency inside of you and make you feel a little bit uncomfortable about where things are right now. And then, because it's important also to be constructive, I kind of want to finish up with some proposals about how, as an industry, we might seek to make things more manageable, more reasonable, and better. Also, before I get any further, I want to point out that prior to this era of the last 5 years where we've had so much innovation, we had a very long dry spell in the data world of very little innovation. So it's not surprising that we've kind of moved on in fits and starts, and that things have, evolved in a way that's not so neat and not so governed. It's understandable why we are where we are, but let's take stock of where we are, and let's try and understand that there's some things about it that are suboptimal and see what we can do. So my first slide is the most extreme one, I suppose. I don't know if you guys know of Matt Turk. He used to be at Bloomberg Beta, which is the venture capital arm of Bloomberg, and then a few years ago moved on to Firstmark Capital. And this is his map of the big data market. It's coming out, actually, it's more blurry on my monitor than on those big screens. I'm expecting that you can't actually read anything on that slide. And that's sort of the point. What you probably can see is that there are a bunch of orange rectangles. And what I would tell you is that in each one of those rectangles, some of them are blue and green actually, you've got anywhere between 3 and maybe 12 logos for different companies. And so what Matt has tried to do with this slide, and it's been around for a few years, I actually did some edits on version 1.0. He's tried to inventory all the companies in our space and then taxonomize them, break them down into categories and subcategories. And I don't know, this is kind of a nice way to anchor the talk. This is incredibly hard for companies who want to come in and adopt this technology to figure out who's to buy. Now, at the beginning of a new sphere of technology, it's understandable and it's actually desirable to have all this activity going on. But once we get past a certain point of maturity and we want to go after enterprise dollars, right? Once we're moving along that axis of maturity, we also kind of need to move along the axis of things being organized and navigable. And I would say that we're much further along one axis than the other. So that's one aspect of it. Here's another aspect of it. Let's just zoom down into Hadoop distributions. And the first thing you notice about this slide is that it's broken into quadrants. That's already indicative of a problem. We know we've got the big three, right? We've got Cloudera, we've got our gracious hosts here at this event, Hortonworks, and we have MapR. But we've got a whole bunch beyond that. We have IBM still with their own distribution. If you look at all the cloud providers of Hadoop, they actually tend to go their own way. On the bottom right there, how many of you knew that Infosys had its own Hadoop distribution? That's it. What's an SI doing with their own Hadoop distribution? And Arena Data turns out to be a small distribution that is put out by a Russian firm and is used mostly in Russia. So apparently we even have regional distributions of Hadoop now. So there's nothing wrong with having competition. In fact, there's everything right with having competition. But understand that with each of these distributions, there are going to be different versions of the same components from distro to distro. So again, we are making things very difficult on the customer. How do you take something that's open source and is supposed to be a shared standard and say, well, actually, we have several different versions of it, and you're gonna need to drill down and figure out which is which. That is also suboptimal. Let's drill down further and talk about execution engines. And part of this narrative is obvious, so I won't belabor it, right? First, we had MapReduce with Hadoop version 1, and then Hadoop 2 came out with Yarn, and our good gracious host here from Hortonworks also gave us Apache Tez, which allowed us to have more interactive execution and certainly get us to the point where MapReduce could be one execution engine instead of the execution engine. So it was nice to see that decoupling of the resource management and the execution engine itself. Before Tez could get especially well established, along came Apache Spark, and Spark's been kind of the darling for a couple of years now. The adoption's been impressive. And I put the Flink logo up there. I'm not saying Flink is going to overturn Spark. I doubt that, because Flink's been around for a long time. But the point is, right, we don't hold on to any one execution engine for very long. We have announced to the customer that there is a planned obsolescence cycle. And not only that, think about the things that we said in the MapReduce days. Because we knew MapReduce was flawed, right? We knew that having a batch processing engine for customers who wanted to do some data discovery amongst other workloads wasn't going to work too well. Do you remember what we said to them at that time? We said, well, the thing is, MapReduce gets you to petabyte scale. And you may not realize now that that's what you need, but you're going to need that. And we also talked about data locality and how, having a distributed cluster and having the data distributed in a distributed file system meant that we could bring special efficiencies there. But then as we moved to Tez and then finally over to Spark, we've kind of abandoned that. Because when the question comes back about Spark and its bias towards memory and how is that really going to scale well for petabyte scale, the answer we kind of give back is, are you really working at those data volumes? Because we don't see that many customers who are, right? And that's true, but what we've done implicitly is we've betrayed the stuff that we said at the beginning, and we haven't really called that out. And when we do that, we erode trust. We are creating a very scary environment for customers, and at some point, we're going to have to stop. And you may say, well, look, that all was fair in love and war. What other cliches can I come up with? We had to break some eggs to make an omelet, and now we're at Spark, and Spark is going to be our stable kind of core platform. But do we really think that's true, and will the customer really believe us? I'm not so sure. And then now we can drill up again a little bit. And here's a list and probably you can't read this very well either. Here's a list of all the Hadoop relevant open source projects that have evolved over the years. By the way, one of the other gold sponsors here, Cask, they actually originated this slide, and at Datamir we asked for permission to take it and kind of extrapolate past the year 2013. And obviously, you kind of see the story. And we're doing a little hand waving here to get the bars to be a little taller each year, I'll be honest, but not very much. It really didn't take a lot of work to show this trend. And you know, this is a mess as far as the customer is concerned. Let me be clear though, all of this would be okay if as vendors and as practitioners, we kept this to ourselves. But we don't really do that, right? We talk about all of these different projects. We put them in our PowerPoint decks. We put all the animal mascots from all the Apache projects in our slides. And if you're honest with yourself, you need to admit that we probably feel a little superior that we follow all this and they don't. And I mean, I'm guilty of that, so I'll just get right in front of it. I'm not the, you know, the best practice as I preach kind of person in this case. But this is a mess. If we make this the customer's burden to understand, then what we are doing is disincentivizing them from adopting big data technology. We need to make it simpler. Phil, go ahead and clap. Absolutely. That's not for me. That's for you, right? It's a wonder anything gets sold at all. That's the downside. I'll give you the converse of that. If we clean this up, can you imagine the opportunities that are in front of us in this industry? I would say we've barely scratched the surface because we've been working so hard on innovating the capability and paying no attention to making things simple and navigable that we have a lot of great opportunity in front of us if we take this problem seriously. To make it real clear, the stuff on the right, that's important. If you look at the database industry from about the year 1998 until maybe 15 years later, not a lot of innovation happened. We had very core, stable relational database technology and OLAP BI technology. And every few years, we added a few features. We kind of got into a routine. The vendors would add features to the software. Customers knew they would upgrade. They would eventually deploy the new version. They would deal with whatever training would need to go on with that. They would get used to the new feature set, and then they'd have 2 years of relative peace and quiet to deploy projects before the whole cycle started over again. Okay, now in a way that's monotonous, but in a way it also lets businesses get on with their business and stop kind of obsessing on the technology. And so it's great that we've lost and gotten past that dry spell and that so many exciting new technologies are happening and that we've kind of broken away from the dogma and the rigidity of the way databases worked. And certainly the pricing we've disrupted as well. All that's good. But what we've done on the left side of the slide there is we've made it really hard for customers to plan. We've also told them that not only do they have to kind of figure out all these things, but they need to really look at the best architecture, or they need to pay a lot to consultants who might or might not give them the right guidance there. And you know, I think the end result of this, whether it's explicit or not, is customers go very slowly now. I don't know what companies you all are from. I'm hoping some of you are from vendors and some of you are actually on the customer implementer side. But the sales cycles are kind of long in this business, from what I can tell. And I think we could make them a lot shorter if we got away from territory where we said the purchase decision you make may well be a career-limiting move. That's really frightening, and I think that's the reality that we have right now. So if it wasn't already clear, just a little inventory of the problems that this brings. We're really incentivizing customers either to put off a purchase or just to take as long as they possibly can to make the decision. Especially because they know that if something's been out for a while, it's probably going to obsolesce, and getting in at least on the beginning of a new wave in technology is going to give them a little more staying power than coming in the middle or towards the end. We are also in many ways asking them to make a one-size-all big bang decision. Pick the execution technology that is going to take on all your workloads. Or if it's a company of some sophistication that has the luxury of having kind of a center of excellence for data analytics, and they're going to say, well, we're going to take on multiple technologies. That's a nice place to be, but now it's up to them for every project and even for each analysis within a project to figure out which engine is going to be the best. All right? And these are problems we solved a long time ago in the relational database world. We already have cost-based optimizers. We already have query processors that understand, that have heuristics, that know how to make decisions about which way to pursue a query. This idea that we wind back the clock and now suddenly it's the customer's burden to figure all this out. Look, if you're a technologist and you love this stuff, that's kind of a nice sandbox to play in, but it doesn't really scale very well. I could have made a separate slide for each bullet on this one, but I took some pity on you and decided not to do that. But I will kind of try and go into a little bit of detail here. SQL on Hadoop solutions. This was, of course, meant to make Hadoop easier for everybody. And how many SQL on Hadoop solutions can you think of? This is where I spared you. I didn't make a slide that listed everyone I could think of. But off the top of my head, there's some obvious ones. There's Hive, there's Impala, there's Spark SQL, there's Drill, there's Presto. Turns out now there's Hortonworks has announced support for Apache Phoenix, which is a SQL layer on top of HBase for OLTP and for operational analytics. And then all the vendors have their own SQL on Hadoop bridges from their databases to make the data in Hadoop look like tables in their database. So Teradata has Query Bridge, and IBM has Big SQL, and Microsoft has Polybase, and HP Vertica has its own, and Oracle has its own as well. It goes on and on and on. Wow. So many ways to do exactly the same thing or kind of the same thing. That's tricky. And even within an individual project, let's think about the different iterations. How many different ways can Hive operate? I count 4. It can operate on MapReduce. It can operate on Tez. Cloudera has actually contributed to the Hive project to allow Hive to run on Spark. Were you guys aware of that? Because Cloudera is not so fond of Spark SQL for whatever reason. So they have Hive on Spark. And yesterday in the keynote, Hortonworks announced a new execution engine that they're calling LLAP, which will allow Spark to give sub-second, sorry, not Spark, Hive give sub-second responses on different queries. So I don't know, that looks a lot like kind of Hive on Spark. So 4 different ways Spark can work. Sorry, thank you. 4 different ways Hive can work. There are probably 6 or 7 different ways Spark can work, but thank you for correcting me. So even if we drill down to something that looks like a leaf node, it turns out it has another 4 branches. That's a little nutty. Then look at the universe of Apache Software Foundation projects, right? And this is where everything's supposed to be neutral and, for the greater good. But we now have Apache projects that compete against each other and do roughly the same thing. And I'll give you the poster child here, right? There's Apache Ranger and there's Apache Sentry. They both are there to bring fine-grained role-based access control to Hadoop. As it turns out, the major backer of Ranger is Hortonworks, and the major backer of Sentry is Cloudera. So the bastion of where things ought to be standardized and vendor neutral turns out actually to be an extension of some of the rivalries between some of the vendors in the industry. So you see, my general thesis kind of replicates itself in lobe after lobe after lobe of the industry. Programming languages. No, I'm not going to complain that there are many, many programming languages. It's been that way for a long time, and that's good. But, and here I do mean to talk about Spark, think about the different ways that you can use the core of Spark from your own code. Python, Scala, Java, and at this point R is a player there as well. So again, no end of choices. I'm not going to read all these out, but we have a buzzword bingo, a buzzword pollution problem in this industry. I was talking with the chief marketing officer of one of the exhibitors here. I'll let them go nameless. But I joked that if we could put each of these phrases on a different refrigerator magnet and then throw in a bunch of actual plain English words, we could stitch together the pitch paragraphs from each vendor's homepage that has a booth out there in the exhibit hall. Actionable insights. When I was at GigaOM, that became such a joke because I get all these pitches from PR folks who are representing the different vendors. And actionable insights came up so much, it became almost like a drinking game at GigaOM, right? And I actually said I wanted to, and I never did it, but I wanted to register the domain name actionableinsights.com and create a parody site for a fictional data analytics product. Maybe I'll do that when I retire. But besides just whining about this, I'll point out one thing, is that these phrases have a lot of power. And we're kind of drawn to them as vendors. When I say we now, I'm talking vendors. We almost feel compelled to use these. And that compulsion is sort of like insects going into the flame of a candle. And actually, that's a very apropos analogy, because as it turns out, when we do that, we lose a lot of precision in describing our own products. And we end up with a lot of noise going on because it becomes very hard to tell our products apart because of that. That's not helping the buyer either. And by the way, it's not helping us as vendors. Ultimately, what we're saying to the customer is you got to fend for yourself. This is your class on defensive driving. As a big data buyer, defensive procurement. You are going to need to look for products that are modular, that are agnostic to different engines, if you want to have some protection from the fact that today's engines will eventually kind of fade into the sunset. This is a self-serving slide. Let me get in front of this, because this is the approach we take at Datamere. We have a component called Smart Execution. It can use MapReduce, it can use TES, and it can use Spark. And we'll add more when we need to. Enough about Datamere for the moment, even though I see some of my colleagues in here. But the point is, to be native with any one of these technologies is actually very dangerous, because there's so much volatility in them that we are really creating a very dangerous situation. Ultimately, that rectangle, or it's almost a square on the right there, it's all about balance. That's what we need, but we really force people to go to extremes. Okay? Abandon TES and put all your chips, go all in on Spark. And this time I do mean Spark. That's tricky, right? Ultimately, we really need to be presenting technology alternatives that have some agnosticism, that have some decoupling, some loose coupling, so that customers can get their work done. And not just today, but the stuff they do today ought to be reusable 2 years from now. Not that many products really take that into consideration as a design point. So that's my last whiny slide. Now I want to talk about some things that we can do to make this better. And I've kind of put it into the format of a countdown list. It's a top 6 list because this is only a 40-minute session, so we don't really have time for 10. Actually, I couldn't think of 10. I think 6 is good, because what I want to try and do here is have a recommendation for each actor in the industry, each role. You'll see what I mean. Let's start with the industry overall, though. We need industry consortia. We need, and I know this scares people and sounds undesirable because it sounds like bureaucracy and committees and kind of all the stuff we really wanted to cast away. But ultimately, if we can't, as an industry, agree on some standardization at the lowest levels of the stack, then it's going to be very hard to get stuff done. Right now, most of us are kind of doing a lot of the same work over and over again. And I will tell you, being from an ISV where we guarantee compatibility with virtually every single Hadoop distribution that's out there, this ends up having real cost to it as well. So if we can get to the point where we've got a standard core Hadoop distribution and can put some kind of a number on an iteration on that standard, that will help a lot. Now, let me also tell you that there is an organization doing exactly that, and in fact, they have a booth here at the show. It's the Open Data Platform Initiative, or ODPI. And actually, I met with them this morning, and they've got a lot of very good ideas. But here's the thing about ODPI. Out of the big 3 distribution vendors, only one's on it, okay? And that's Hortonworks. Cloudera's not on ODPI, neither is MapR. And ODPI is talking about their next standard as being around cluster management, and that will be premised on Apache Ambari, which is a little bit problematic because Hortonworks has really standardized on Ambari, and the other 2 major players have built their own solutions. So ODPI, it's absolutely the right idea. There's just more work to be done. Number 5, vendors. This is a mea culpa, if nothing else. We need to stop copying each other's messages. I don't know if this is imitation as a sincere form of flattery, or if it's laziness, or if we all just get tied up in the same vocabulary and so we feel that using it will convey a certain meaning. Actually, I think it's because we have a little bit of guilt around sounding too technical. So we want to simplify it. We want to put things in lay terms. And then when we do that, we end up with kind of stock phrases that make it hard for us to distinguish ourselves from each other. And ultimately, that hurts everybody. So that's a problem. We need to be able to be brave enough to use some crisp language and describe what it is we do, rather than, kind of talking in terms of a grandiose vision around data and analytics, because when we do that, then we all kind of end up with a consensus and we talk about the same vision. That's not helping anyone either. I'm even going to lecture at the venture capitalists, so if there wasn't hubris before, there is now. I'm from New York. I'm not from the Bay Area, so I didn't grow up in the culture of venture-funded companies, although I do work for one now. But there does, as an analyst, I can at least make some empirical observations. The VCs do seem to have a herd mentality. And when VC number 1 invests in a given company that does X, it seems like their peers up Sand Hill Road then look at other companies that also do X and say, we want to invest in them too. And I understand how that comes about. There's a rivalry, and there's a certain amount of endorsement that comes from the investment in the first company. But if VCs focused on investing in companies that added value rather than duplicated value, and that built on the work of companies that are already out there, we would probably be able to move forward with greater velocity as an industry than we do right now, and we would end up not cutting the pie in so many slices. In fact, the pie gets bigger, the slices are fewer, and if I have my math right, I think that means we all make more money. Which ultimately is the thing here. I'm not only appealing to people's sense of ethics and doing things in an elegant way. This ultimately comes down to revenue and profit. Analyst firms, another mea culpa. But I didn't work at Gartner or Forrester. I worked at little old GigaOM. And we viewed ourselves as disruptors, of course, because that's what we do. Analyst firms have a very valid role to play. I mean, if I hit the backward button on the clicker and went all the way back to the first slide with that map of the market and all the different vendors, it's an analyst's job to take something that complex and that messy and distill it down into something a customer can understand. And there's all kinds of laudable support for that kind of work. That's when analyst firms are at their best. But analyst firms are also, the big ones are incredibly influential. They wield power, and sometimes, I think even without meaning to, they make things a little bit more complex rather than distilling them down and making them simpler. For example, most analyst firms, and even at GigaOM we tried to do this, are very much into inventing phrases or terms to help describe something. I'll think of one from way back just to reduce the controversy on it. Logical data warehouse. Remember that one? Or the 3 V's, right? Volume, velocity, variety. Seems like I'm picking on one analyst firm here. But, so some things happen when that goes on. As vendors, we really need to appropriate the same language as the analysts, because they are in fact reviewing us and endorsing us or not endorsing us. So we really need to speak their language. And so when there's a big battle of who can invent the phrase with the fastest pickup, we end up with that buzzword pollution getting even a little bit worse. So that's a little problematic. Another thing that happens is these firms, of course, will do their big roll-ups where they review all the vendors in a given space and they numerically rate us and compare us. That's good. That's a buyer's guide, basically. And I've already explained that buyers are not particularly well served with the landscape we have right now. The problem is sometimes there's a lot of companies that are put into one bucket that actually may be very different. And now we've got a problem where we have an apples to oranges comparison that is portrayed as an apples to apples comparison, and that too makes things more complicated rather than less. So if analyst firms could focus on what they do best, which is simplifying and demystifying and deconstructing for the buyer, then we're in a much more positive place. I also want to talk about developers. Actually, this parallels very well what I've asked of venture capitalists. Venture capitalists, I said, why don't you please fund companies that are adding value? So developers who are out there establishing open source projects would be great, and obviously this is not something we can legislate, but to the extent possible, all other things being equal, why not look into projects that break new ground rather than additional projects that kind of cover the same functionality, even if in the mind of the developer they do it better? We've got a lot of projects with a lot of overlap, and if we could clear some of that up, it would make a complex thing a little more simple to navigate. My last slide before the thank you one is actually on customers. And I've been talking this whole time about how we're not serving customers well, and I think I've implied that in fact we sometimes kind of blame the victim. The customer is the victim. And here I am making an ask of the customer. But I'm going to do it anyway because as vendors, we tend to listen to customers. We want customers' money. So customers actually wield more power than perhaps they know. If customers demand a consistent, core, standardized big data stack, if they specify that as something they'd like to have, they'll start to get it. If they specify it as a prerequisite for us to get in on the RFPs, for us to conform to some spec or some definition, that's probably going to happen. So customers also need to be assertive and either demand or at least ask for what it is they need. As much as it makes sense to rely on analysts to help them with their purchasing decision, customers and the whole industry will be best served the more of their own research they can do. So clearly, with all those different companies in that first slide, there's no way a customer can practically research everything themselves. But the more research a customer can do itself and the more it can make a choice on the merits, that's really going to help. If customers don't do that, what actually happens is we get into a battle of who has the best sales team. And there's nothing wrong with having a good sales team. Datamere has an excellent one, and I'm very happy about that. But it's going to be best if we're all telling our stories rather than telling the same story and we're rewarding whoever tells it better. If that is the contest, then each vendor is going to play in that contest and try and do their best. If not, however, then we can really be looking at facts and merits and real capabilities, and the signal to noise ratio can get a lot better. I'm down to 3 minutes and change, which means I'm happy to take any questions. That awkward moment of silence that starts, go ahead. That wasn't so awkward.
So you kind of talked about all of those things of standardization. Where do you think, if there was a standard, Datamere fits into?
Where do I think Datamere fits into the standard? Well, Datamere, it sits on top of those standards. So I'm not sure we fit into it because we're providing functionality that sits on top of the stack. But we have a job to do, which is a huge test matrix of all the different combinations of various versions of various distributions, and we have to maintain compatibility with them. And B, intentionally, what we ask of Hadoop is kind of the very, very core, because we want what we do to be portable. If we had standards and more than the very low-level core could go into those standards, and we could be assured that that functionality will be implemented from distro to distro, then we could do even more.
Let me clarify that question.
Sure.
Are you a BI tool or you're an ETL tool? Or data prep tool?
I'm being asked if we're a BI tool, an ETL tool, or a data prep tool. All of the above. Seriously. Seriously, we're end to end. But you didn't really want to just throw me softball questions about Datamere, did you? Does anybody have questions that are less vendor specific in the back in the blue shirt? What projects need to die? Wow. That's harsh. What do you think? That's cheating. I am cheating, it's true. I don't know, maybe MapReduce needs to die, but I doubt it. Anytime we're pushing something, it's going to get adoption, and then we have a responsibility to maintain some backward compatibility. I'm not sure that killing projects is the answer. I think what we need to do is work on making the surface area more concentrated, because the fact is that any kind of exhaust we've put out, we really can't destroy it. There's conservation of matter in this industry, I think.
So do you think that that's where some of the cloud providers are providing value because they're simplifying it for their customers and saying, we saw the one-click demo today, right, which was they'll spin everything up from an infrastructure standpoint, but it also has specific services and technologies that they're integrating that the customer doesn't need to make that choice.
So I think the question is, does the cloud help here? Is that the answer? Because among other things, the cloud kind of puts an abstraction layer over the deployment of a distribution and the management of it and the upgrading of it, right? Sure, but still every cloud distribution is a distinct distribution. So while it takes some management burden off of us, it doesn't necessarily hone down the ecosystem in general. My shot clock has gone down to 0, 0, so I'm going to say thank you. If you have more questions, come on up. Thank you very much.